In the final few decades of the 20th century, 2 adaptations of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol would be released featuring beloved children's characters as their main cast. Both released under the Walt Disney banner, although these productions were in no way connected to each other outside of their common source material, they would stand out as 2 of the definitive versions of their era. One for setting the standard, and one for breaking it. Mickey's Christmas Carol was released in the winter of 1983 and marked Mickey's return to the big screen in an all-new original cartoon for the first time in over 30 years. Initially making its debut as a double feature alongside a reissue of The Jungle Book in the UK, and re-released 1977 hit The Rescuers in the US, whose own popularity would even lead to a third theatrical run in 1989 in anticipation of its sequel, The Rescuers Down Under. Mickey's Christmas Carol would subsequently go on to be regularly and widely featured on television during the holiday season for decades to come, even airing on CBC every year to this day since its first airing in 1985. And clocking in at only 24 minutes, it was an easy watch with all your favorite Disney characters taking you through the classic story in a fun and pretty safe feeling adventure, serving as the unopposed standard of Dickens' Christmas Carol adaptations for children for nearly a decade. That is, until the winter of 1992. Much like Mickey, the Muppets were also making their return to the spotlight after an extended hiatus, but unfortunately under much sadder circumstances, with the Muppet family still grieving the loss of 2 of its most fundamental innovators, prolific Muppet performer Richard Hunt, and the man at the very center of it all, the great Jim Henson. Tasked with carrying on the legacy of his father in what was at first only commissioned to be an ABC TV special, Brian Henson would endeavor to create what would become perhaps the most memorable Muppet production of its time, in a grand, powerful, and at times truly horrifying motion picture that would be no Mickey Mouse operation. Although much like Mickey's Christmas Carol, the Muppets would feature an enormous cast of colorful characters, old and new, inhabiting the streets of 1840s London, with familiar faces like the Great Gonzo and Rizzo the Rat guiding us through the Victorian-era holiday classic in their first-time on-screen pairing.
Thank you for making me a part of this.
And Kermit, Miss Piggy, and Robin donning the roles of the Cratchits. Many of its key casting choices would play a pivotal role in its overall grim and foreboding tone.
Creepy and kind of woohoo, spooky.
Unlike Disney's choice and beloved comic and cartoon namesake Scrooge McDuck in the lead role of Ebenezer,
Money.
the Muppets chose to cast a human actor for the part, at first considering the likes of David Warner or George Carlin for the role, before finally settling on Michael Caine. Caine famously insisted on playing the role with the same dramatic gravitas as one would approach the Royal Shakespeare Company, all for the benefit of an audience largely comprised of young children likely left pondering why the protagonist of their colorful Muppet Christmas movie was played by a very scary and mean old man. However, as menacing as Caine's towering presence over his Muppet co-stars would be in setting the stage for the overall tone of the movie, it would be no match for the completely surreal and unnerving iterations of spirits which would go on to haunt both his character and generations of movie-going children to come. Initially cast as established Muppets, with accounts of Robin or Scooter taking on the role of the Ghost of Christmas Past, Gonzo or Animal as the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come, and Miss Piggy pretty firmly slated as the Ghost of Christmas Present, the Muppet Christmas Carol would opt to go in a radically different direction than its predecessor, with new Muppet creations that could better underline the ominous nature of the story, meaning kids most familiar with the lovable Jiminy Cricket as their guide through the spirit world would be greeted instead with maybe the scariest floating ghost child ever captured on film. The Ghost of Christmas Present would offer some temporary relief before withering away from old age before Scrooge's very eyes, only to be replaced with the faceless, soulless abyss that is the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come. A figure so chilling, even our narrators abandoned ship, breaking our last tether to the cartoon world of Muppet joy, and leaving our audience of largely 6 to 10-year-olds on their own to witness as this terrified old man pleads for his life to the cold, unforgiving personification of death.
I don't like this story.
Whereas Mickey's Christmas Carol played it safe with familiar characters mostly flying through a harmless cartoon adventure highlighting the main points of the story, The Muppet Christmas Carol is actively unsettling in its representation of the ghastly consequences of a life of greed on one's own mortality, with shots throughout feeling right at home on the grand stage of modern horror cinema. The thread of existential gothic horror throughout the film does in fact serve a purpose, however, in the overall telling of the story. As Brian Henson explains, you need to go to those dark places to make the ending as joyous as it can be. And this really is the foundation of The Muppet Christmas Carol. Through the dread, fear, and sadness, there's also hope, joy, and laughter to balance out our journey through this classic ghost story. The highs and lows experienced and expert care in fleshing out our characters really captures the epic nature of the novel, to the point that this children's movie, largely inhabited by 3-foot-tall anthropomorphic felt monsters, is widely regarded as one of the most definitive and accurate adaptations of our time. Although the epic scope of The Muppet Christmas Carol put it head and shoulders above most other in its depiction of Dickens' classic tale, I think it owes a small debt to Mickey and friends for providing a false sense of security to kids everywhere in the 80s and 90s by making a fun, worry-free adaptation, thus adding to the terrifying impact of the Muppets version, and carrying on in the grand tradition of kids' movies of the era scaring the ever-loving crap out of their audience.
Whoa, that's scary stuff. Hey, should we be worried about the kids in the audience?
No, it's all right. This is culture.
Oh.
I'm a big fan of both versions, and I think Mickey's Christmas Carol is a really easy starting point for a feel-good half-hour introduction to the bullet points of the classic novel. But the amount of effort, artistry, and heart put into the Muppet Christmas Carol, infused with its elevated sense of horror and emphasis on kindness, is a perfect stepping stone in understanding the cruel machinations and oppressive inner workings of capitalist greed, providing a grim warning on the perils of being a miserly old jerk, and championing the importance of community, togetherness, and goodwill towards all, just as the Muppets have always done best. And those are my thoughts on Mickey's and the Muppets Christmas Carol. I'd like to thank you all for taking the time out to watch this video. In the spirit of goodwill during these holiday seasons, please consider donating to our Patreon to help us continue making more in the future. And like, subscribe, and share it to your friends who you think might like it. Thanks again for watching.
We have a few humans and a few Muppets. And I might add that the humans are very realistic. Brian Henson is a great director. He's a pig director.
He has this thing about being close to rats. I don't know what it is.
We love working with him because he lets us off early for lunch. But the thing that made Scrooge happiest of all was that his life lay ahead of him. And it could be changed. Or something like that.